Glad that you are here today. We're going to do a quick mic check. I tried to do it a little bit earlier during the countdown. Not sure if it worked. But yes, let me know if you can hear me while I am welcoming everybody in. Thank you, Stacy, for joining us. Glad to see you here, and a big shout out and howdy to you. This is June, and June is saying how much almost afternoon. So hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world today. Glad to have you. Hello, Edward. Haven't seen you in a while. Glad that you could join us today. And then, let's see who else we have. Tabitha Weekly. I actually have weeklies in my family tree, so maybe we're cousins. Glad you could join us for the first time. Tabitha, I asked you earlier, and I'm going to remind others, make sure that you are signing up for our newsletter for our reminders so that you know when we're going to release a new video or when we're going to have these free webinars. So make sure you're on that email list. And Tabitha did say that she just joined the newsletter list on Tuesday. So grateful for that. To join the newsletter, all you need to do is go to familyhistoryfanatics.com/resources. Okay, familyhistoryfanatics.com/resources. And there will be free guides, genealogy guides. There will be writing guides and DNA guides. Sign up for the newsletter. All you do is sign up for one of those free guides, and it will put you into the days that you want. So get the free writing guide, and you'll be signed up for the writing reminders. Plus, get a handy dandy free little handout. Good morning to Debbie. So glad that you could join us as well. Weekly is your married name. Okay, so I'm related to your spouse. So great to have you all here. All right. So if you're watching this at any time, I'd be happy to hear from you. Let us know where you are watching from. Now, we also started with a new countdown, and I love that June said that she liked it. I think I'm going to play a little bit on the 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That was a little bit slow, but I was trying new things, and I always like to get your feedback. So glad that you are here. And as always, like this video, share this video, and leave comments so that others can benefit from these free webinars. I feel like genealogy is writing family history is underserved at genealogy conferences. So every month I'm bringing you a new webinar, and I hope that you will enjoy it and invite a friend. So thanks so much for watching live. And if you're watching a replay, I'm so glad that you watch when you can. Make sure that you check out the link in the description box. That is where the handout is. If you have any trouble with getting the handout, then go to the primary channel, which is Family History Fanatics. Write your family history as a secondary channel to that. So go to familyhistoryfanatics.com/contact. And on that one, you will be able to send me an email and say, hey, I couldn't get the handout. And I'll be happy to send it to you. So, all right. Oh, Westy Mom. Looking forward to today's presentation. Donna, I'm so glad that you are joining us here. And June said she really liked the handout. All right. Now, one of the things I'm going to say about the handout before I get started is that, let me turn this one off. Is it kind of a work in progress? If June says she really liked it, you're going to see a number of questions that we're going to go over today. And what I hope is that in the comment section of this video, you guys will share with me some additional questions for the topics we have, and we'll just kind of expand it together. So throughout the presentation, as we get to a topic and I start asking some questions, as you think of similar questions or tips that you want to share, please put it in the comments. If you're watching live, put it in the chat. We also like to put it in the main section as well, because sometimes I have to edit the video down afterwards. And so if you make sure you put some of your questions in the main comment section right after the video, before you forget, if you put them there, then we can expand that handout, and I'll tell everybody when there's a new updated handout later. So let's be collaborative in this, as we're writers. So I think that's all I have for pre-show. So let's get into the webinar without further ado. So glad that 16 of you are watching us live. I'm certain that number will go up. And if you're watching live, leave comments, leave questions, talk to one another. We're writers. We like to be social. So let's go ahead and get into all of this topic. All right. So today's topic is about writing about ancestral strangers. So when we're writing a compelling and meaningful narrative about ancestors you've never met before, it can be really, really daunting. But today I'm going to show you a few simple techniques that will help you to be telling their tales in no time. Now, the first step is that you have to do research. And even though you've never met this person you're writing about, it's best to write about someone you've researched rather than randomly pick someone from a family tree. Even though I'll use a randomly selected person later in this presentation, if you happen to be related to them, I definitely want to know. I just went on a family search and found a biographical sketch at random and picked them to kind of highlight things going on in the presentation today. So, since you have researched your random stranger, the person you've never met, you should have or will soon have completed step 1A. And that will involve gathering your documents. If you haven't completed the steps, here's what you need to do. Gather as much information as possible about a person you want to write about. Review easy records such as census records, vital records, images, and gravestones. These are the ones that I always think are easy entry level records. You may have some others, and feel free to tell me what those are as we go on. But gather those easy records and then add to it and expand with city directories and newspapers. For those of you who are fans of Family History Fanatics, you know these are my top 2 favorite record collections. And they have just so much for you to draw upon to write your ancestors' stories. You feel like you've come to know them and they're not really a stranger. Additionally, add records such as military records, religious records, property ownership, courtship, court proceedings, you name it, grab it and gather it. If you happen to have home sources, such as artifacts, certificates, photos, scrapbooks, journals, and so forth, get all of that stuff out. Get them into one central location. And it can either be a digital location or a physical location. But then what you need to do is you need to organize that information. So if you have already organized all of your genealogical material into one location, you can skip step 1A and 1B, and then move on to writing the rough draft. But to ensure that everybody gets on the same page, let's review a couple of things about organizing. If your research looks like this office and lots of piles and piles of materials, then what I want you to do is somehow clear off a space, and the person that you're going to write about or the families you're going to write about, you're going to put all of their necessary relevant research in one space. Now, if you're writing about the life of one person, you can easily just have all of the material without using genealogy software. Arrange your material in chronological order and then place it in a container separate from anything else in your genealogy workspace. So get a basket, get a folder, whatever you have, clear off your desk and only have that project. Everything can clutter the floor and we won't pay any attention to the mess. But make sure that when you're working on that one project, that's all of the material you have in one location. Now, if you're going to write about more than one person in your story, multiple families, multi-family members, or even if you just want to focus on one person and bring in the additional relatives throughout their life, then I often find that it's easier to organize in genealogy software. For me, it's a non-negotiable tool for organizing your material for writing about multiple generations. I prefer Roots Magic, Family Tree Maker is a close second. There are others. Just get it organized. That's all that matters, because it easily helps you manage multiple relationships, events, details, and sources. You guys are leaving wonderful comments, and I'm going to stop here in a moment and pull those in. So always feel free to leave your questions and your comments throughout the presentation. The other place that you can organize your material is leveraging Family Search, Ancestry, MyHeritage, Find My Past, WikiTree, among other online trees. The point is be organized before you write. You'll also want to arrange events in your person or family's life into a timeline. Create a timeline for events that are common in the person's life, birth, marriage, death, and then expand the timeline to include changes in residence, religious rights, educational achievement, job changes, military service. Basically, if you found a date associated record, put that in your timeline. So you did step 1, your step 2, 1A is gathering the information, 1B is organize everything, and part of organizing everything is outlining everything in the timeline. So let's stop for a moment and see the different comments you guys have dropped in. Hello, Shane. Glad you're here from Queensland, Australia. It's 2 a.m. You are such a trooper. I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad that I hope this will be worth staying for. Watch. Okay. Hello, Jeff from Florida. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoy this presentation. And then Stacy, you love how I keep saying step 1A and B are together, because if you don't organize your resource, you may lose stuff sometimes for many years. And so in the handout and in this presentation, I just feel like if you find it, organize it. And when you organize it, it makes you think of more things to find, and they go back and forth, and they're very synergistic. But if you gather, and then don't organize, it becomes problematic. Now, of course, if you take a trip to a genealogy library, or if you take a genealogy research trip, and you need to gather for many days, and then come home and organize, that's fine too. That's the only time I would separate the two steps, because I'm really gathering right now because I was organized before I came here. I'm coming home, I'm organizing so then I can go back out again. So yes, they do really truly work hand in hand. Can't count how many times I come back to notes that I thought would make sense when I wrote them to find I have no idea what you were trying to tell me. Absolutely. So that's just kind of a work in progress. And when you're rewriting things, the reason why I believe in writing and researching and writing is for this very thing. You go back to your notes, you try to reprocess it. If you can't make sense of it, then you revalidate the research, and maybe it'll make sense. And then you can turn it into a story and continue with the process. Okay, so Tabitha had a quick question. We'll go ahead and drop this in really quick. How do you do a woman's maiden name, then married name? It all depends on what you're striving for. If you're organizing paper files, then put them. I tend to put women in the family folder before they get married, and then when they get married, anything thereafter goes into that folder. That's one of the strategies I use. Anybody else want to chime in on her question? Feel free. That sounds great. Okay, so let's get back to the topic at hand. Go back here. Okay. Where did I want to? Okay. Now, one of the ways to make your timelines, again, remember I said if you're going to process multiple people, is to leverage genealogy software programs or online family trees, because they have timeline generators that are created as you're adding a specific thing. So it's not an extra step, because I want you to research, organize quickly, and get to writing. So I try not to give you extra steps. So another reason why you want to try to use that genealogy software. The other thing to keep in mind is stories are better told when you have extra family members as part of your story. So if you're making a timeline by hand, then make sure that you add in the life events of spouses, children, parents, siblings. There we go. That's all of them. You can add extra as you find that they're relevant. It all depends upon the person you're writing about. And sometimes you know beforehand if you need to loop somebody in. Often you'll loop somebody in if while you're going through the organization process and you come across a census record, and for 3 census records, a unmarried woman lives with your uncle until her death, well, you'll probably want to put this unmarried woman in his story. It could be a number of relationships that aren't necessarily his child or his sister. Maybe it's a great aunt and he became responsible for his great aunt. That's how you'll know, oh, I need to pull these people in. Okay. So gather all that home material, and then remember that step 1A and step 1B are going to go hand in hand so that you don't have to research. You get that idea? Research something you've already discovered. But I have a caution. You'll rarely be finished researching your ancestor. And so I invite you to start writing about an ancestor, even if you only have a couple of documents about them. Don't wait until you're all done researching a person before starting to write about them. Can always revise their story later. You guys have some great comments here. Let me pull them in real quick before we keep going. June said, caution with census records that a wife isn't counted as a daughter because she's younger than the householder member. I think there's an extra word in there. And the unmarried couple, the 1950 census confirmed a family story about an unmarried couple. Absolutely, right? You may not have documentation that says in any other place that your relatives were married, but then you get to a census and you see that they're living together, then you'll want to be pulling those in. Okay, thanks for clarifying. The census record, a wife isn't counted as a daughter because she's younger than him. Very true. Very true. Great comments. Love them. Okay, so let's go here. All right, so we have gathered and we organized and we organized and we gathered, and it's time to write a rough draft. Now, I am going to maybe make a few people mad, but if you've been around here long enough, you know that I don't necessarily mean to make people mad. Okay. Let's see right here. Many writers will try to tell you that you need to write about story arcs. And while a quality story will have a story arc, sometimes you won't make sense of that life until after you have totally written about it. So I want you to postpone looking for the story arcs. There is a webinar that I have done, or at least a presentation that I've done about finding the arcs in your family histories. I don't believe I have it on this channel. I believe it's over in the members only on Family History Fanatics. If it's not, it looks like I have a video to add to this series. But don't worry so much about trying to figure out how the story starts, what happens in the middle, and then how the final scene would go. And the reason is, in many instances, you really don't understand your ancestor story arc. For example, when I started writing about my grandpa's dad, so Grandpa Lou's father, Sherman, I thought he was just a day laborer for the most of his life until I started processing all the records. And then I realized his story was really day laborer to business owner, back to day laborer, from rags to riches to rags. And that didn't come up immediately while I was processing these records. So just kind of put those stories arcs on hold. Okay, a story arc. A story arc, just kind of what I highlighted with the rags to riches to rags. A transformational story like the one I wrote about myself when I was in beauty pageants my first several years. It was an ugly duckling to swan. This could be a journey. It could be a quest. Um, well, other romance. So those are his story arcs. It's basically what is the overall theme and the transformation that's happening within a story. So thanks for asking. And I like that Jeff agrees with me. It's a construction. You don't want to assume until you know more. And that's what today's topic is about. You will start seeing the story arc as you dig a little deeper. I talk a lot about writing family histories. And the way I recommend you do is record by record, sentence by sentence, you craft a story of your ancestor's life. Process all the details from your sources and organize them in chronological order. Now, remember the rough draft? The goal of the rough draft is to finish it. It's not to write a bestseller the first time out. I believe Ernest Hemingway had a saying that a rough draft is CRAP, or maybe even a stronger word. But the idea is your rough draft is not what you're going to share with everybody. And so, to ensure that you process all of the details you've gathered in that timeline, write in chronological order, and then you'll go back and you fill in the gaps. So, I will say this again and again. So why don't you guys take a moment and type this in the comments? Record by record, sentence by sentence. I can, because you can, write the stories of my ancestors. By typing it in, you're going to get it into your brain. And when it's into your brain, you'll go ahead and you'll write faster. So, oh, I love this, Shane. Don't get it right, get it written. Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. And the way we get it written is record by record, sentence by sentence. I can write the stories of my ancestors. Now, while you're processing all of these records that you've gathered, um, you will want to keep track of your citations. Now, they can be messy, ugly citations. But don't leave a note like Jeff, or I forget who said earlier, that said, "Oh yeah, I wrote my notes and I can't remember what they meant later." You want to write enough that you remember, "Oh, I looked at the biographies of physicians in Ohio from 1820 to 1855." That's enough. I made that up, by the way. And that's enough to know that I can go back and actually make a beautiful citation. But the idea is, particularly in Google Docs, I talked about it in this video. I got to go this way. In this video, I talked about how you can insert footnotes or comments and they will move with your story so that later you can finalize everything. And so you do want to insert your citation in such a way that it sticks with what you referenced and then it moves as you're editing. And then when you're done, you can finalize all the drafts at the end. Oh, look at you. I'm so proud of you. Record by record, sentence by sentence, I can. Thanks, Debbie. And thanks, Tabitha. You did the homework assignment. Good job. All right. So once you get it in chronological order and you've processed everything, well, then you have some decisions to make. Because as you consult a record and insert citations linked to the text, you will eventually have a story. It may not be the most engaging, but all you have to do is kind of rearrange everything and you're telling a story. But really, what you have is a biographical sketch about your ancestor because a sketch is really presenting documented facts of an individual, but there's not quite a story. And sometimes that's going to be okay because you just want to highlight something about an ancestor. You want to organize your details. You want to pull all the facts out of the records you have and put them together. And that's fine. And that's a decision you can make. However, if you want to write a life story about an ancestral stranger, let's go from a biographical sketch into a story. The first thing I want you to do is to think like a journalist. Now, if you were on my other channel and you watched a video about newspapers, you know that I studied journalism in college. And then, I don't know if I did say this, then for a number of years, almost a decade afterward, I participated in writing human interest stories about adults and teenagers in pageants. I was no longer in pageants, so I was writing about the people who still were. And that gave me a lot of knowledge about how to write human interest style stories. Now, when you think about a journalist being a journalist, I want you to recognize the qualities a journalist has. They're traditionally known for being extremely inquisitive. If you haven't interacted with a journalist before, even if you haven't seen them in, movies or read about them in books, well, then think of a toddler or young child who constantly asks, why, why, how, who, when, where. Inquisitive. You know what that means when you experience it. So, when you have that in mind, you'll understand the journalistic mindset. And we're going to apply that nature to writing family histories. We'll ask a tremendous amount of questions. And in many circumstances, we'll have the content necessary to tell a better story when we answer those questions. So, today we're going to talk a lot about questions. Okay, I see some great comments going on. Keep them coming. If you do have a question, especially if you want them answered while we're watching, for those who are watching live, can you put a little Q in front of it? That way, some of it is commentary. Sometimes it's discussion between you and other members, which is fine. We're a community, and I love that. But I don't want to overlook a question that needs to be answered right away. It's kind of like earlier, the question was, what is an arc? What's a story arc? So if you could just put a Q in front of it, that would be really, really great. All right. So let me introduce you to my stranger. And we're just going to use her kind of as a case study to point some things out. So this is Inez Whitbeck, and he's actually Andy's 8th cousin, chosen randomly from Family Search Memories Gallery. And you'll notice this is a biographical sketch. It presents facts about Inez without really telling a story. So what are we going to do? How are we going to put on that journalistic thinking cap and start diving in? Well, remember, toddlers. Questions: who, what, when, where, why, how. Well, let's start with who. Who is probably a whole lot easier to tackle. Now, as journalists and genealogists, we gain more insight to the questions about the people we are writing about. And it always starts with the fundamentals that we find in the documents that document a person in a time and place and perhaps who they're related to. And as you go through, you're going to see a number of common themes showing up in these records: name, an age or a birth date, parents, religion, education, how they worked or if they owned something, some association, and what their home life was like. Were they married and had children? Did they live with their family? Did they have no children? Was there step families and blended families? That's kind of what I mean about domestic situations. And as you process those records, you'll begin to get a sense of it, but you'll only be at the bare facts. And we want to turn that into a story. So we need to ask more questions about the who fundamental. Now, in other videos, we talked about descriptions, physical descriptions. How do we write those physical descriptions, and where do we find the information to write a physical description? I'm not going to cover that topic in this video. Instead, in the handout, there will be a link to videos about physical descriptions, and we'll leave that training there. The other thing we have is my book, A Recipe for Writing Family History, and a few blog post that I did mention in the handout that tells you how to add familial context. So, how do we add a little more context to a birth story about the parents of the person we're writing about? All of that's covered in that recipe book and in those blog posts. So, let's go to topics that are a little more deeper, if that's okay. So, notice that this sketch mentions Inez's church involvement. So that helps define who, who and who is she? What is she involved in? What makes up her identity? Well, religious involvement. And so I'm going to start asking questions when I see anything mentioning someone's religious participation or the community they're involved in. So when we think about religion, what are some of the questions that I will likely ask? Okay, first of all, what's the name of the religion? um, because it might be not be what you think it is. Oh, it's Christian. Well, what kind of Christian? Is it Episcopalian? Is it Methodist? Is it Baptist? Is it Seventh Day Adventist? Right? What is the name of the religion, and what do the people believe? Um, you're not trying to give commentary on what your ancestor believed, but you're just trying to understand their religious worldview. Do they believe in the Messiah has come? Do they believe the Messiah hasn't come? Do they believe Muhammad is the prophet? What do they believe? There's Tao and Taoism. Is that right? Taoism and some of the Asian religions, they have some really interesting tenets, and it does impact how people live. So try to see if you can figure that out. The next thing you want to find out is what are some important rites or ceremonies that the religion um, had people go through as part of their worship and their commitment to that with faith. How are they performed? At what age? By whom? There are a lot of little details. For instance, when I think about my German immigrant ancestors that I wrote about, Joseph Geisler was a German Catholic. His wife was a German Lutheran. And one of the ceremonies that needed to be performed and by whom was getting married. Well, unless one or the others converted, they couldn't get married in either church. Now, both of them stayed faithful to their separate religions, and then they had a decision about how they were going to raise the children and who was going to be baptized where. Do you get the idea? So you want to know the ages, you want to know the ceremonies, you want to know who does the performing of who can participate and when and so forth. And thanks, Shane. It's pronounced with the D like Taoism. Thank you so much. Look at this. I researched the Oskadites of an ancestor. I had no idea what type of religion it was. Absolutely. So, two religions that pop up frequently in my ancestors are in Canada, the United Brethren. And then my grandmother, the one that was adopted, her adopted parents were Universalists. And I didn't know what that was. So it's really important to pull this in because then you can understand your ancestors so much better. Some other questions you'll likely ask is where did they worship? And not only just where as an address, but how close to that place of worship was. Okay, say it another way. How far away did your ancestor live from the place that they worshiped? So my German immigrant ancestor, from what I understand, he lived about 20 to 30 miles away from the Catholic Church in Columbus, Ohio. So how often is he going to go and what kind of commitment was involved? While his wife eventually went to a Lutheran church that was much closer. The Catholic Church was in downtown Columbus, and the Lutheran church was a little bit west of where they lived in Prairie, Franklin County, Ohio, if I remember the geography well. I just remember it was like he had to go into town and she went out of town on the map. Let's see, other things about the church. What did it look like? What was it made of? Um, how large was it? Was it ornate or was it very, how do you say, simple? Is that the right word? Simple, just it doesn't have a lot of decorations. That tells you a lot about the people who worship there. You also want to ask about what were the member meetings like? What was the size of the congregation? What was the ethnic makeup? What was the socioeconomic status of the members that came? All of these to tell you about the place in which your ancestors worshipped. Some other questions. What did the worship service look like? Was there a lot of music? Was the music joyful and jubilant, or was it very stoic and calm? Did they only have a piano to do music, or could they have, and I know that sounds weird, but bongo drums? There are a number of missionaries who I knew after their mission at Texas A&M, and they talked about the different music from around the world in Africa and Asia and the Middle East and things, where there were different instruments used at worship services than that what I'm used to. And so by helping to understand all of these aspects of religion, you can take a little entry that says my ancestor was Presbyterian, and now now you're telling everybody what that means. Now, if I have not covered a question that you think should be a part of the religious topic, be sure to put that in the comment section so we can expand that out. Oh, and maybe the music is a cappella. Maybe they didn't have any instruments at all. Seeing pictures or being inside the churches, my goodness, so true. If you do have an opportunity to go into the facilities which your ancestors worship, that can really give you a sense of not only connection, but you can help describe the place in which your ancestors worship. I did have this experience when I was in Ontario, Canada, and I got to go to this little church, the Elko Church, that was walking distance. I mean, across the street and 100 yards maybe from where my Zumstein ancestors lived, and then be inside and see the wood paneling and see how high the roof was and see the extra rooms that they had or didn't have, and then seeing the cemetery outside. Being able to describe that facility was really quite helpful. And so I highly encourage you to explore that and then add that context into the story about the people you've never met. Okay, now this is something to point out. My church is the most recent because we kept moving and the old building burned down. Make note of that. So for instance, if you say, we're going to Gillershine, and from what I understand, this is not going to be the church that very many generations of my ancestors worshipped in, because the church that is currently standing is the new church from 1850. And my ancestors left that part of Gillershine in 1856. So for 5 years, they may have interacted with that church, but I need to make sure that I highlight that in my stories. Definitely. I love when I inspire people. Oh, a lack of background, no baptism membership records tells us yes, absolutely. Now, you can't assume that they weren't believers, right? They just may be, I don't like what's offered. I haven't found my community, or I just don't have time for religion, or it could actually mean a lack of faith. But absolutely, I love that point. Thank you so much. And I think you said your name was Donna. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Love it, love it, love it. Keep it coming. All right, so let's talk about the next topic that I have in mind for you, and that is where. Now, as genealogists, we know that we need to maybe talk to people from a specific area. When I was trying to understand, and I'm probably going to butcher it, forgive me, a Saint Brigid's cross. I think that's close. I didn't understand anything about that. I did have an Irish friend of mine who is Catholic. And so when I was trying to understand about these little St. Bridget's crosses that I kept seeing with Irish individuals, I said, okay, tell me about this. Why do you have it? What do you know? So talking to her and then talking to local leaders, I began to understand a little bit of that history. Talk to church, see if there's a church history, see if there's a church historian, talk to them, read those histories, see what you can gather. Oh, I'm very close on the pronunciation. Thanks. Yeah, thanks. Check for church newspapers or look for newspapers. We've talked about looking for strategies for finding religious information in newspapers on the main channel, so I won't cover it too much here. But also look for biographies of religious members. Who was the pastor or the minister or the rabbi or the leader of the congregation, if you will? And what can you learn about them? Because that can also help paint setting. My ancestor went to this church. He was 30. The father was 56, and he was from the old country of Germany. Oh, wow. Well, if he's a German immigrant, he's got this older guy, and he came, my ancestor came and he was single until he got married, but he really came as a single man. Maybe this is kind of like a surrogate father figure, and the title father really had many meanings. So really try to dig deeper into the information that is about that religion. Now, we won't do this for every topic. We're going to focus on the questions and the relevant associations that you have with your ancestors to draw out. But just remember, there's a lot of records that you can dive into to help flesh out that story. And even if you have maybe 4 records about somebody you've never met, you could write a 90-page 6x9 book, because I already did that. And it's on my back shelf. Okay, here are some great little tidbits coming in. I found a church, a useful anchor across generations. 3 great-grandparents married in the same church in the 1830s as my parents in the 1950s. In Australia, where people arrived in 1788. Nice. Mona is a research librarian. Writing while researching took the form of asking questions about what next to research rather than about what I'm researching. Being inquisitive has its drawbacks. It does have its drawbacks. We do have to be focused, right? But remember, you know how you're going to stay focused? It's the rough draft. Because we're diving deeper into the story about our ancestors, and we've got that first draft that's all based on those documents. And at some point, you've gathered enough information and you go, okay, I've got enough. I've got enough so that I can explain things to the best of my ability. Okay, so now let's go to the next topic. In this particular biographical sketch, Inez talked about 3 different places in which she obtained an education. Now, we want to talk a lot about education here. Because this article was about a woman who was born in 1898. And that's really, really important because this is a female and she's attending universities in the 19 teens. I don't know about you, but I was taught in school that women couldn't get school and they couldn't go to college and they couldn't get degrees or higher education in that time period. And yet, Inez was going to the University of Utah and the Utah Agricultural College. So, what kind of questions should we ask? And then let's come back to this concept of, wait, that's not what I was taught in school. So, some of the things we want to look at is, what is the name of the school that the ancestor attended? Where is it located? The same thing you would do with a church, you'll do with a school. How far away was it from your ancestor's home? What did it look like in terms of construction or size? Did it look like a red schoolhouse, or did it look like modern, Gothic? Well, modern and Gothic. That's not really the same thing. Did it look very Gothic and foreboding? Did it look very industrial? What did it look like? What were the courses of study? What were they required to learn? And did it change over time? Or is it different than what you learn today? Who were the teachers or principals? What did they teach? How did they dress? How did they dress compared to the students? Now, mind you, you may only have their picture in the yearbook, and everybody seems to dress differently for your yearbook pictures opposed to day, but it can kind of give you some senses of what's going on. I mean, I remember a yearbook when my history teacher was the only male teacher in the school that had a mustache. Everybody else was mustacheless. But that can kind of tell you about the trends and styles in the area. Also, if you're able to find out what was the disciplinary practices. So when I was a little tyke, I got in trouble a lot, and so did my brother. And disciplinary practice actually changed over time. We had it was almost like a sorority paddle. I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about, but a wide paddle with a handle, and that was used. There was a ruler that was used to spank our little tushies. And then we started doing timeouts. Sometime timeout would be in the classroom off to the side with folders put around your head, and you had to duck your head, and that was timeout. Another timeout, I was put in a storage closet, and I discovered I'm claustrophobic because I started pulling everything out and tearing the room apart. After that, they put me at a desk and behind the secretary with the same folder thing, just out of the classroom and behind the secretary. So that was timeout. So there were a lot of different disciplinary practices. The dunce cap is a stereotype, but did it really happen? Okay, enough about disciplinary practices. I was in trouble a lot. But then let's also talk about clubs, sports, organizations, what were offered. And if you're able to find out what's your relative to participate, did they do well? Did the team do well or the club do well? What was the organizations that they participated? How large were they compared to the other thing? My mother was a vice president of the Safe Driving Club, and she got in 2 wrecks while she was in leadership in the Safe Driving Club. So go ahead and you'll start seeing these things. Now, that story about my mother, you may not know because this was just oral tradition, but when you're talking to other family members, they may tell you these things as well, and you go, "Oh my gosh, that's so funny." Okay. So there's a ruler across the hands in Catholic school, and clean chalkboards. Banging chalkboards is definitely one that people are familiar with. But there might be other things as well. And some of it isn't really done anymore because it's kind of abusive. And other things you're like, yeah, we should probably bring that back for sure. So then the other thing is, what value did society place on education? This is going to require a little legwork, but in Los Alamos, New Mexico, we have a lot of chemists. We have a lot of chemists, engineers, the third one, physicists. How could I forget that one? Anyway, so many of the people put a high value on education. In other locations, they're very rural, and education just get the bare minimums and start working on the farm. And so you want to see if you can determine what type of value did society place on education. And then we want to talk about what restrictions did the community have. Now, sometimes this could be discriminatory restriction. Sometimes the restriction is you could only go so far and that's all they had available. Sometimes you had to pass an entrance exam in order to continue on in your education. And if you didn't, then you couldn't. And so think of all of those type of all of those type of restrictions that might be there in the education system. Go ahead and reference school records, yearbooks, alumni directories, but my favorite are newspaper articles and also this reference that I'm going to show you here in a moment. All right, so this is mentioned in your handout, and is called Making of America website. It's a digital library of primary sources in American social history. It focuses on education, psychology, American history, sociology, religion, science, and technology. Okay, so in this particular uh, book, or this resource rather, this Making of America resource, I did a browse books, and then I found education in Ohio, and I came to this reference material on page 129. It talks about the different topics that you have to study year by year. So this was a continuation of the first year, the second year. So reading from books and papers, the use of words, spelling by sound and letter, oral, and by writing. So that's how they're going to train it. Writing is on slates, blackboard paper, in copybooks, small and capital letters. So it's getting really into the minutia of what is expected in the second grade year. And then in third grade, for reading, it's analysis of lessons, second or third reader use, definitions, expressions, vocal drills, vocal voice culture. I have no idea what voice culture means, but you can see how the course of study progresses over time, and it's a really great resource. Now let's go back to Inez for a little bit. Oh, I forgot to mention here real quick. In this book, it also had sections on the education of the blind, the education of the deaf, and also education in reform institutions, be it people in crime, in criminal activities as youth, as well as the asylums. And so it was a really great reference for those in Ohio, and it's found on Making of America, and you just go to Education Ohio and then you find it. And this was the standards for the whole school. Now, whether people lived up to those standards, that would be different, but at least this was the ideals that they were trying to have out. So let's go back to Inez. Now, Inez had said she attended the University of Utah since she was born in 1898. That would place her college years about 1916 if we assume she was in college at the age of 18. Now, this entry is from the Utah History Encyclopedia website, where I found on Google, and I did a history of University of Utah, and here's something came up. And one of the things that I learned is it was initially called the University of Deseret and was founded in 1850 and allowed women to attend from the earliest days. Oh, okay. That seems rather unusual if you were taught, again, like I was, that females didn't have the ability to attend college until the 1940s. Well, in this school, females were allowed to attend. Now, we can argue or research that they were only allowed to study certain subjects. But when you come across like something like that, you have to be prepared to have your perceptions or preconceived notions challenged or confirmed as you dive into the support material. Now, there was a name change, but it wasn't close to the time that she was living there. If there is a name change, then you want to mention it. So my grandfather, he attended the State University of Ohio in Iowa City. Now, for anybody that is an Iowa fan, you know that the university that's now in Iowa City is called the University of Iowa, not Ohio, Iowa. So after he graduated, there was a name change. So I need to be historically accurate in the use of the name of that university while I'm writing his story. But then to help clarify that it's no longer the State University of Iowa. Iowa State University is in Des Moines. The University of Iowa is in Iowa City. I need to make footnotes or add a little sidebar, something to help clarify that for readers, but I need to be historically accurate. So you'll want to research and make sure if there's a name change in the school that you're using the right one. Also notice, I need to go back. Notice the highlighted section. I want to draw your attention to the highlighted section. Military drill was compulsory for male and female students to participate in while they were attending that university during the years of World War One. It's possible that while Inez attended this school, she also participated in those military drills. Did you have a female ancestor that had the opportunity or requirement to do something similar? I was blown away when I saw this detail. I was like, oh, wow. Okay, so now I need to go back and try to research, when did she actually attend University of Utah? When were these military drills there? And maybe what did she have to participate in? The fact that she was unmarried throughout her life, the fact that she pursued an education and did a number of other service-related opportunity, did it have that foundation in the university she went to so early in life, so early in American history, and the type of training they have? I don't know. There's a lot of things that come up as you start doing research, and then you fill that in for a story of someone you've never met. Okay. So, how do we take what we gathered and turn it into a story? This will probably be the only example I have in this section, because I really want to get our brains thinking about, how do I interview my ancestors, even if they're not here to talk. So notice how these sentences are still in a rough draft form, but I've given you some possible insight into her years. And I really wish I knew the specific years she's attended so I can confirm whether she participated in those drills. Remember, your first draft, even as you're adding historical context in, your phrasing might be awkward. But as you gather that information, as you're processing into that biographical starting point, that rough draft starting point, you will eventually be telling better stories. Let's take a moment real quick to see if you guys have any questions thus far. I'm going to grab a quick drink and catch up on some of the comments. Okay, so here's some other things that you'll want to check out. June said that women teachers were not allowed to be married until the 1800s. You'll want to double check that, because it's entirely possible that if they were married and their children were old enough to attend school, and the area didn't have a teacher who was unmarried who could do such teaching, it's possible that particular area made allowances for the married teachers to come and teach their kids as well as teaching the other community children. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying, okay, let's go research that. Is that accurate? And so forth. Strapped for not studying my spelling words. Turns out I was dyslexic. And again, like I said, some of the punishments were rather harsh, and we know things now, and you go, oh, but in your story, Jeff, if you put that practices in, you're telling us more about your story, right? And imagine what we could do if we can infer some things from our ancestors. Other punishment, standing in a corner with back to the class, dunce cap on head was standard. Grandmother went to college and became a teacher, and my grandma, but the other one didn't go to college. And now we have a daughter with bilingual first grade. So keep diving into that education. I don't see any other questions and comments. I think we're all caught up. Oh, we do have a question. Marriage license. Let me put that one on hold. I'll put that at the end. Okay. And I do love this. I do love this. Remember how June said that women teachers were not allowed to be married in the 1800s, but she did her due diligence to ensure that that applied to the area in which she lived. So, yeah, go ahead and say, I think this is the standard. Here we do have the accurate, and you back it up. I love that. Good job, June. All right, let's keep going. All right, so some other topics that we can discuss. Occupations. What skills or training did your ancestor need, and what did it take to acquire those skills? How much did it cost for them to acquire those skills? What was the economics of their work, which they produce? How much did their activities cost? What other things can we think about the economics of their work? What did it cost in order to to get to the place where you were? What were the salaries or wages offered? Was it a prosperous line of work for that person to be involved with, or were working conditions really, really bad? What were the business cycles involved? Some work is very seasonal. The oil industry has boom years and bust years. In the boom years, things are really, really good in oil. In the bust years, not so much. The other question, did your ancestor have to be a part of a guild or union or a professional association? If so, what benefits did these association offers your ancestors, or were they more hindrance than helpful? What was your ancestors' social standing based on the work they were doing? Let's be honest, few people think a garbage man has high social standing compared to a engineer working on the atomic bomb. Okay, but both, well, the garbage person is needed. We need to take that garbage away. I like this. What was the social status of their work? Yep. Okay. What causes affected or motivated others in the same occupation where your ancestor lives? So, were they trying to promote nuclear energy? Were they trying to restrict nuclear energy? Were they trying to get better working conditions? Were they trying to get equality of pay? What were the causes that they were dealing with? Also, what service or product did your ancestor make or offer? Consider, where did they work? What did the facility look like? Um, were there any scandals, court cases, or accolades to understand a company's relationship with the community? And when I say company, this also be somebody who's self-employed. And did your ancestors' business, how did it compare to others in the area? Was it really prosperous? Was it really small? Was it a niche thing that only if everybody went to this particular business to get this thing, because that's the only one that could do it? Um, Here, Jeff said, I learned that a blacksmith had a higher social status than manual laborers because they were vital to the community. Love it. Using law books for of a time frame, you can research to help the salary. Absolutely, tell the story. Law books would definitely help you understand lawyers, but it can also help you understand regulations in the area. I like that. Let's see. All right, next one. Associations. What was the organization's purpose that your ancestors joined? What was the nature of it? How large is it? How exclusive? How did the organization impact your ancestor or the community in which it served? What requirements were necessary to join the organization? What events did the organization host, sponsor, or organize? And did your ancestors serve in leadership positions in the organization? What position did they hold and what did they do? Uh, so my grandpa Lou was in a number of organizations, and there was this one picture of him blowing up a balloon, and he was wearing this Letterman jacket, this high school Letterman jacket, but it didn't go to any high school that I had ever heard of. And I never met him. Well, okay, I met him when I was 1, but he died when I was 2. So I like to say I didn't really meet him. And so in this picture on the jacket, there was a swan. And I thought, well, what the heck is that? Well, it turns out he was a member of the Swans Club, and it was just a social organization that men gathered together. I'm still unsure, like, who could be a part of it, but I do know that he was a president, and there was this big, huge picture that my mom told me about of all the past presidents, and everybody was in a dark suit and he was in a plaid suit, like a checkered one. And so he really stood out. And they, from what I heard, he always kind of wore oddball attire so he could stand out. So do you have something similar about your ancestors, an organization that they were in that had clothing in their, either in pictures or in the family attic, an archive rather, that helps give you clues about these people that you haven't met, and what can they tell you about what they were doing? Now, What are some interesting organizations that your ancestors were part of? And what other questions would you ask when you're thinking about, oh, they were a member of the Odd Fellows. Oh, they were part of the Shriners. They were part of Job's Daughters. I'm just listing the ones that I'm aware of. I know there's others out there. What other questions are we not including? Do I not have on this list? Be sure to share that with me. We're going super rapid fire. There's a lot to cover. Thank you for staying. If you need to bail, go ahead and come back to the video later. I totally understand. The video's free and it'll be on here for as long as we have the channel. So no worries there. Let's talk about the domestic situation. Who did your ancestor live with? Was it a multi-generational family, or was it just a handful of individuals? Was it a married couple with an unmarried sister in the household? Who did did the household also have servants or boarders or additional extended family members? Who did the chores in the family? What did they do? How young did children start participating in chores? Did your ancestors' family have special needs? And when I mean special needs, such as maybe they did have people who were blind or had some mental challenges, or because I have an ancestor who was blind, I have another ancestor, a relative who was deaf, not direct line, kind of tangentially related. And those were some special needs, but there's a lot of other special needs. What were they? And how did they impact the family? And the other thing I want to ask is, was the home life stable? And you may not be able to understand if there was abuse or neglect, depending on how far back you go. But there are a number of things you can see financially. Were they moving around a lot, or were they in the same place? If you look at tax records, did the amount of prosperity they had increase, or was it going up and down? And maybe they were charged with fines for delinquency. As far as relationship goes, was there a number of family moving in and out of the home? Were there multiple children being born? Were there a lot of divorces taking place? Get what I'm saying with the stability of the home? Records can reveal to you some of the stability of a home. It's up to us to try to think about it and ask those questions. Oh, I like this. An alms house is another type of household. Absolutely. And remember, a household just doesn't mean a mom, a dad, and some kiddos. It can be that they're in a tenement or an apartment, or they're in an institution, or they're at college. There's a lot of different home situations that's going on. And then June has this great resource for finding out if your ancestor had a stable life. See if you can find their own words, information in their own words. Okay, so, I forgot to show that slide. I went through all the questions. So we'll take a quick moment for those of you who are taking notes. Those are listed in the handout so that I can keep going. All right. As we research all of those who questions, there's still more that we can research to expand our article and have it shape up. You may like a story of the life, but at least you have more depth to the events and the activities. So the next thing we want to talk about is the where. In business school, we talked about one key to success for every business, and it's location, location, location. Real estate leaders agree that whether it's a home or a business, location can be the single most important factor in the success of a business or the value of a home. So, if that's true in real estate, it's most likely true in family history. The location in which your ancestor lived greatly impacted their lives. So, let's ask some questions about the home. Describe the features. It's not really written in a question format, but I hope that you will get the point. Is the original building still standing? What does it look like? Is it the same as the past? Do photos reveal the construction of the home? If so, how many stories did the home have, or does it have a basement? What materials were used? How many windows does it have? How many rooms does it have? What kind of rooms does it have? Does it have an indoor kitchen or an outdoor kitchen? Does it have indoor plumbing? Does it have outdoor plumbing? What other amenities were on the property? Um, did it have a forested lot? Could they make a garden? Could they have an orchard? Is there a pond? It all depends upon where your ancestors lived, what the property is going to look like. And then after that, we need to describe the neighborhood. And when I put the asterisk by the neighborhood is how close were your relatives to the neighbor? Were they across a wall or were they across an acre? And then if they were in a neighborhood of houses like tract housing from the 1940s, who were the neighbors? How did you access their home? Did everybody have fences, or actually did they have no fences unless you maybe had a dog? um, and what was also in the neighborhood? Parks, churches, schools, infrastructure, distance from work to play to worship to grocery shopping and stuff. Kind of outline the amenities in your ancestors' vicinity so that you can understand, wow, they only went to the grocery store once a week. And I can relate to that now. I mean, we have an okay grocery store here in Los Alamos, but if I want to do my big shopping at Sam's Club or Walmart, I need to drive 45 minutes to an hour and then spend an hour there and then drive an hour home. So I can relate to any ancestors who had a long haul in order to go to shopping. Some other things to consider. Let's see. I'll pop this up for a second. Let's just kind of highlight a few things without going into depth. I don't want to keep you too long. Let's go to this. You can always just go to the handout. The handout has tons of questions. Consider questions related to agricultural practices. If your ancestor worked in farming or ranching, you may come across a number of these types of questions to investigate. I also want you to check out the geography. Having lived in multiple places around the country, I can see how the geography greatly affects the questions you would ask about the place where your ancestor lived. The Adirondacks of Upper New England are very different than the mesas in Los Alamos. The Hurricane Alley of Houston is different than Tornado Alley of Iowa. So notice all of the different aspects of a place in which somebody lives and how that geography can impact the ways in which they lived. Now, this is going further back. I recently went to Alaska, and there was a wonderful museum, and it talked about essentially 5 major tribes in Alaska. And they had to display on the shoes they wore, the clothing they wore, the modes of transportation they had, their ceremonial garb, and artifacts. We'll call them artifacts. I don't want to call them instruments, but artifacts. And you could tell just by looking at those items how close they lived to the water and how close they may live to some of the tree forested areas of Alaska, all by what they had. And it was all dictated by the geography in which they live. So if that's going to be the case for natives, then it is also going to be the case for I don't want to call them more civilized because they were civilized, just different civilizations, people who lived in cities and farms and things of that nature. So make sure that you go ahead and really research the geography because it does have a major impact on your ancestor story. Then research the town, the village, the state, the county, and ask certain question. How old is this place and when your ancestor arrived? Because new towns are very different than established towns. And if you're writing about places in Ireland or England, those have more generations of history than Los Alamos, which was built in about 1940s, and everything sprung up from there. It's going to be quite different. And how did that impact your ancestors' lives? Also consider the different ethnic groups and the problems that were maybe in the town, because it tells you about the town's history. And I know that my German immigrant ancestors, they walked into a political climate that was really confusing, considering that they were leaving after the failed German Revolution of 1848. They wanted to go to a land of promise, and here they're fighting again. So you want to ask those questions about the different places which your ancestors lived, and you can create setting for your ancestors. And having a setting helps tell better stories. Now, here's an example of a resource. This is listed in the handout, and it talks about home economics. And if we click on this, we go to Cornell. And this is a book that was focusing on, okay, if you're going to be moving from the city to the country, let's get you prepared for what it's going to be like to live out here. I forgot to share this screen. Let me stop for a minute. Share screen window. Here you go. And so we'll zoom in here a little bit. And one of the things, okay, that doesn't work. I did the wrong one. I like this. It says, and this is from 1900. Okay, I really love this. It has been said in jest that farming is the most expensive fad in which the city man can indulge, and in many cases, it has proved only to be true. But in each instance, the cause of failure has been a lack of knowledge of the business in hand and a willingness to leave everything in the hands of hirelings without instructing them sufficiently as to limits of expenditures. Wow, talk about voices of the past to really help us understand why the fad of the country life and why city folks have a problem when they're moving out there and what to do about it. It's a great book, and it's a guide to how to live in the country home. So this is a great resource, but also look into the commentary that are in the front material. It's really, really good. All right, let's go back to the slides here. Okay. The next thing we want to talk about is when. When did your ancestor live? I often advise people to include something that can help your readers anchor themselves in a time and place. So let's go over a couple of those things. For instance, courtship practices. Now, this is just a commentary, a satirical commentary on courtship practices that was in the newspapers. But maybe some of these courtship practices impacted how your ancestor lived. Some other things, it kind of goes back to the household, but who was the head of the household and who were they responsible for? Who was responsible for the unmarried women in the family? Who was responsible for the widows? Who was responsible for the orphan? And how were they cared for? That has changed throughout various cultures, but it really does help give you an insight into the time and place, because now it's often the widows are cared for by themselves or maybe life insurance policies, but in the past it could have been the oldest person who has a title and the estate. From the estate, they have to take care of those widows and those orphans and so forth. Um, you also want to research crime and punishment. What were some of the ways? What were some of the things that were considered crime? What was some of the punishments that were taking place recently? Um, so I just yesterday was looking at newspapers for my police officer ancestor, and we have this great picture of him in his police uniform, and we're thinking, oh, this is really great. He's been a police officer for a while. Well, I came across an article where he was asleep on the job, and it turns out that he was drunk on the job, and they immediately fired him because they're like, no, you're not going to be asleep on the job. Now, is it harsh? Is it typical of the time? I have more research to do, but we want to look at crime and punishment because it really can help us have some insight. What were some medical practices common for the time? Again, I have an ancestor on a different line. He was blinded from complications from having his eyes swollen while he was serving in the Civil War. And his eye was lacerated to drain the pus. instead of giving any kind of antibiotic. Now, did they have antibiotics? Probably not. That was the common procedure at the time, and it caused him to be blind and not really care for his family very well. So we do want to check out those medical practices for ailments at the time. Again, let's talk about celebrations and festivities. What leisure activities were available? Maybe not much, or maybe the whole town shut down and had, wax candles that they put along a street to serve as luminaries to invite people in. That's a common festivity that's been happening in northern New Mexico for a very long time. And then also have different names. There are luminarias in one part of New Mexico, and there are farolitos in another part. And so you really want to know the festivities, know the custom, and where does it apply depending on where your ancestor lived. What did your ancestor serve during wartime? It's not enough to just know they participated in this battle and they were part of this unit, but really dig a little bit deeper. Where did your ancestor live? Were they close to the action in their home, or was it far removed? Did they have to flee their home because, General Sherman's coming and burning up the whole South is an example. What networks help them sustain themselves, or what support networks were they a part of to sustain the people that had been out of their area serving? And also take some time to talk about what sacrifices were required for those in the home front and those on the battlefront. What were the sacrifices were required? Because that's going to help you also see resilience. And that's a story that is buried in that story arc that will come to life as you start putting that in. Now, we will talk about some cautions here in a moment. Stick with me. Let's also talk about major historical events that happened in their lives. For me, Challenger astronaut. That was a pivotal moment in my early childhood years. And from that point, it went from all about the space to let's be cautious about space and maybe we won't need to go there. So that was a pivotal moment in my own life. Then also think about technology, what was available, what was invented, how did it change the economy? Because we don't have telephone operators anymore because technology phased out the need for the person to go and connect the phone lines. But that wasn't a job that a number of my ancestors and their siblings had, my female ancestors had, when the telephone operating job was available. Other things, what transportation was available, what communication options were available, and what entertainment was around. So another thing you can do about this one is June had mentioned going and get those diaries because that could tell you about the stability of life. But here I mentioned in the handout slave narratives. There are oral history being written around the world. Great projects are trying to capture oral history. But in this slave narrative, you may be surprised to find that not everybody thought that freedom was all that different than living under slavery. Some people weren't. In this narrative, she said she didn't encounter the Ku Klux Klan. She also talked about the thoughts that people had and the reality on the ground. And so be prepared to see different viewpoints instead of one that may confirm the current narrative that is in place, but maybe you will find some narratives that confirm what we think of the past. So dive in and get a sense of when they lived, where they lived, and who they were. So once you have asked all those questions, I've asked a ton of questions, then what? Now it's time to put your genealogist cap back on. You've fleshed out what your identity is, what happened in their life, and put them in a specific setting. Go and research back into the past. And then what I want you to do is I want you to start organizing things. Now, as you start putting these topics together, you're going to realize very soon that you want to keep the research you do for occupation, religion, the 1950s, you want to keep that separate from a specific ancestor. And the reason why is because a lot of this research will go to the next ancestor who has different combinations of these different associated topics. And so if you research this information separate from them, then you will be able to build off that and then pick up a new associated topic. So it's almost always harder to write about the first person because there's so much to research. But then as you have an ancestor who shares the same religion, lived in the same town, but maybe their timeline's a little bit different, then you're just researching timeline and then you're building off of this other source material you gathered. So there's a number of ways you can organize that. You can have file folders of the different topics. You can have digital photos on your computer. You can also use Pinterest and create your own boards in order to put the information, or you can just go to Pinterest and see here, fashions of the 1880s. So you can go see what boards people have put together. There are a variety of different boards that are on there. You can also leverage Evernote or OneNote or these other topics, the resources. The key is just keep your contextual research separated from the individual. Now let's talk about some don'ts. I want to jump here to this don'ts. Pull up my notes here real quick because we kind of shifted ahead. Okay, let's see. Oh, here's a great little, I'm going to save that for later. Okay. Okay. Okay, great comments you guys have there. All right, so let's talk about the don't. And I've already made one video about the don't, so repetition is the first law of learning. So we're going to go through this one more time. It is crucial to approach historical context with care and sensitivity. While diving into the historical context of the past, we cannot impose assumptions or judgment upon our ancestors. Actually, we could, but we shouldn't. We've never met the ones that are I've never met the people who are the focus on today's webinar. I've never met any of the ancestors that I'm writing about, except for my mom and my dad. So I can't presume to understand the hows and the whys of their choices. And even though I know my mom and dad, I still can't presume to understand the hows and whys of their choices, their actions. I can just document like a journalist / genealogist. I can just document it, the what, and then allow my own self and my readers to take what they need or want from the stories we write. So we're going to embrace a balanced approach. We're going to use evidence, just like good genealogists were, and we're going to honor the legacy and preserve the narratives in a respectful manner. Remember, our ancestors are going to have black sheeps, and that's okay. And our ancestors weren't perfect, and that's okay. So when piecing together the puzzle of our ancestors' life, resist the temptation to fill in gaps with assumption. You cannot infer that everyone who inherited slaves wanted them or mistreated them. In some of the slave narratives, there were plenty of people who said that they were treated well. They said post being freed, they had worse condition than when they lived in slavery. And they also had a unique person or set of persons in which they blamed. So you cannot presume what you don't know, can't fill in those gaps with assumptions. You can't assume that everyone who had their children baptized in a specific church or I don't know what the synagogue, when you're officially a member of the synagogue, I don't know what that's called. Please forgive me. But the idea, you cannot assume that somebody who has their children go through these rituals believed in all the tenets of their religion. And then you can't assume that every woman wanted to vote. Again, you may think, oh, yeah, they did. Well, not really. And so we need to be very, very careful when we're including historical context in and doing this research and bringing it into our stories. So remember that the absence of evidence is not confirmation of anything. It's just an absence of evidence. As historians and genealogists, we need to refrain from stating what our ancestors thought, believed, or did if we don't have documentation that supports it. So what are we going to do instead? I kind of teased it in a moment. Instead, what we're going to do is we can suggest or speculate, but we need to add clarifying words that's what we're doing to add the historical context so that we can place our ancestors in a time and place. So we'll use phrases such as, it's possible grandmother thought this when World War II happened or began. It's possible that my aunt was missing her brother who was serving in World War II the day she got married. See, I can't see that she did because maybe they didn't like each other, but I can say it's possible she wished he was there. It's possible. You could say the tenets of the religion are thus and such for the people who did thus and such. See, we're talking about the tenets, the religion in general, without saying my ancestor believed X, Y, and Z specifically, unless they said that they wrote down their testimony. You could also say a typical home in the area had the household leader be this person and whatever. Compared to the households in the area, my ancestor's home was better, worse, different, the same, so on and so forth. So avoid judging your ancestors' lives and choices with presentism. And I talked about that in a video that I do have linked in the handout. Recognize the past social, cultural, and ethical landscapes was distinct from our own, shaped by different influences and circumstances. So I do want you to humanize your stories so that we all can connect to these strangers on a deeper understanding at a deeper level, that we can empathize with them, that we can appreciate the challenges of their choices within their era's constraint. And if something in your ancestor story is problematic, write this story as historically accurate as possible. Then, if you still feel like, oh, I don't like these terms that people use, I'm uncomfortable with this treatment. If you want to write a preface to say, hey, I am just writing this historically accurate, I'm going to keep my judgment to myself. Or if you do want to have an appendix to say, this wasn't right, and over time, this has changed, then you can have a commentary in the appendix, and that would be okay. But put your ancestors in their time, in their place, and you're going to tell better stories. So that is all I have for you today. If you have any questions, it is time to put those in here now. We have just a few minutes before we hop over and go watch the premiere together of the 3 pro tips that dramatically changed my life in writing. But let's go ahead and see if there's any other comments or questions before we head out. Shane said, I just discovered the blog site I was using deleted all my posts. Oh no, I'd been too inactive. A heads up, you might have been nice before. Heads up would have been nice before they did that. So true. So when you're sharing your stories, always share them in multiple places so they don't get lost. So if you do have a blog, then I invite you to use a service like Blog to Print, which will take those stories, combine them in a book, and then send you the book as a hard copy version. Also make digital copies of your stories so that you can put them on other platforms as well. You can also donate your books and your digital books to various archives, and I did a video about that previously. So go ahead and make sure you back up stuff. I feel so bad for you, Shane. My goodness. I'll do that. Oh, I was trying to start that. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Make sure to get the questions in. Oh, In the first draft of my great-grandma's stories, it completely dropped off her son after his birth. He just disappeared until the death of her husband, and it didn't catch that until I read it twice. You know what? That happens. And that's why we write a first draft. We write a first draft to finish it, and then we start analyzing things going, oh, yeah. What happened to him? So good point. Okay, Deborah, I am so sorry I didn't include your question earlier. I wanted to try to keep us on topic as possible, but let's go ahead and have this in. Do you have a recommendation on including images, photos, clips of census, artifacts, marriage license? Are there limits to how many is too many? Okay, so I believe it was June that she said I have a number of videos on what to include. There is a video about copyright, and I know I mentioned including images, and I talked about that. And then I do have some blog posts over on familyhistoryfanatics.com. If you click on writing, then you'll find some things like how to arrange pictures, how to maybe caption pictures. Those should be over there. So we have a lot of content. So now the question is there a limit to how many is too many? Depends on the format you're creating. If you're creating a photo book, I want you to create a photo book, which photo heavy, text light. Make sure that people can actually do genealogy research on your book in the future. So my daughter just brought home a yearbook, and it is a genealogically inferior book. Very few photos are captioned. Group photos are lacking. They are not captioned. If they are captioned, they don't say who is what person on what row. Don't do that. Okay. So if you're going to do a photo heavy book, ensure that you have enough text that it's a genealogically significant book. If you're doing a text-based book, I would say it depends on the layout of the book. So I have a 6x9 book, and if I include the migration routes and I include a map of Australia as a possibility of where my ancestor could have gone, just so people get a sense that here were his choices. I try to have one, maybe two pictures per section so people can get a sense of that section. If you want to include let's say you got the entire pension file from your Civil War ancestor, maybe put a relevant snippet in the main portion of your book, and then you can put the entire pension packet at the end of the book as your appendix, your photo appendix. Is there too much? Well, again, if you have a lot, ensure that you're telling the story and you're enhancing the story with images and graphics and documents. And then if you have extra material that doesn't quite enhance the story, you can always create a photo section at the end if you're doing a major text-based book. And then, no, too many photos isn't too many. Have enough to tell the story. That's what I would say. But also recognize that not every picture needs to be included. And that was a hard lesson for me to learn in my book, the one that's right there, about my time in pageants. Not every picture helped tell the story. I need to include the best pictures. So in pageants, you needed to know, especially since I competed in swimsuit, and there was a big change from one year to the next. Well, you needed the first year swimsuit, and then you needed the second year swimsuit picture because I won the swimsuit award, the fitness award, my second year. And then I dropped a lot of weight. Well, a lot is relative. I had dropped about 4 dress sizes. And so you would want to see that, right? But did you need to see my rehearsal clothes and my training pictures? Well, it all depends on if I had enough story going on there. So I hope that answers more in depth than what you were anticipating. All right. Okay, so yes, Donna, I do have questions about software and citations. A number of them are on the Family History Fanatics channel, and there are a few about the citations here on this channel, and they're listed in the handout. So creating a chronology, you'll want to look for videos about spreadsheets and timelines, and then Citations, I have videos about citations on Roots Magic. Don't have them on Family Tree Maker just yet. I do have adding source citations to the Ancestry family tree for non-ancestry sources. I keep hitting the mic. So I do have a lot, and if I don't have anything, just send me a follow-up question through the website. Go to familyhistoryfanatics.com and go to contact and send me something there. Let's see. Okay, commentary in an author's note or a footnote. Okay, we have, Stacy, this is a wait. I have this fantastic interview that I did with Carol Baxter, I believe her last name is. I know her first name is Carol. And we talked about this subject, and she has this cool technique called box text. So within the next month or two, I'm editing a lot of videos, and I don't know where she comes in off the top of my head. It will be a video about box text, and that is what I'm going to actually be my new favorite recommendation on author's commentary. If you want to put it there, there's some other uses for this box text, so stay tuned. I'm really, really excited about this video. I'm not going to give you the answer because I want you to hear that question. I want you to hear what she said because it's really great. Okay. Oh, thank you, Mona. There was a equivalent baptism for the Jewish community. Thank you so much. I love learning from you guys. All right, so the premiere is going to start at 12. So we all have about 20 minutes to get ready. It's on this channel. There should be a notification somewhere, but we're going to hop over and watch that together, and we're going to call it a day until tomorrow. Tomorrow we are on the main channel with a video about how to stay within your budget. If you have ideas, make sure you send those over to the Family History Fanatic channel, and then we will have a members only webinar right after that. So lots of learning. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I love having you here. Oh, Cynthia, I love this. How many images is too many? We need to be a curator, not an archivist. When we're publishing books, for sure. But here's the other thing. Why don't you just, if you have a lot of photos, create a scrapbook. Just make sure you have enough captions that it's great. And then you have a scrapbook with all the photos that you want to put in and organize them by year and topic and person and so on and so forth. And then in your book, you can have fewer. And then somewhere in that book, references, you have the scrapbook and then have two sources. So then you never really have too many pictures, right? Okay, I love pictures. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining. Shane, go to sleep, and we'll catch that video later. And everybody else, we will see you later. Thank you so much for joining. Have a great time.